Alright, I'm going to explain to you guys what the game we're going to make today is. So as I said, we're making a tab game. And the first step in making any app is going to go and open Xcode. And what you want to do is create a new project.
We can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, one second. Alright. So you do File, New Project. Alright, once you're here, you're going to pick a single view application and press Next. So today we're making a tab game. I don't know how many times I made it, so yeah, so this page basically you're gonna enter some information like your team, the name of your product. You shouldn't worry about all of this yet. Just make sure you have Swift selected and storyboard, not Swift UI. And we don't need any of these. So I'll go ahead and press Next. And I'll save it, yeah, in my downloads. All right, we have just created our first Xcode project. So we could actually run this. It's going to be a blank app. All right, so let's go ahead and go to our view controller. Actually, our main storyboard, main.storyboard. So let me explain what main.storyboard is. So it's going to be like an interface builder where you can use things like drag and drop to add things to your screen. And we're going to be using it to build the UI for our game today. So as you can see a phone screen, and you can start building your UI. Alright, so first thing first, you're going to look for this button, this plus button on the top right, and click on it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to need for our game is a stack. We're going to need a vertical stack view. So you can look up stack and drag and drop this one onto the screen. You can place it wherever you want. We're going to move it anyways. Alright, so I put it in the center. Was everyone able to grab a vertical stack view? Alright, good. So I'm going to go ahead and make this take the entire space. Alright, so actually I'm going to go back to the size so you can understand what I'm doing with this stack view. Alright, so we had our screen, we dragged and dropped the stack view. So what we're going to be doing next is adding constraints. So what constraints are is kind of a set of rules and telling how far views need to be from each other. So for example, for this view, we want it to take the entire space. And for that, we're going to give it a top, right, bottom, and left constraint of 0. So what's going to happen when you give it these constraints, it's going to expand and take up the entire space. So let's see it happen. You enter 0 on all sides, and it will just expand. So the reason we do this and we don't just expand it and make it bigger is imagine if you open your app in an iPad. It's going to look like this. But if you have constraints, it will look like this.
Where is constraints?
Yeah, I'll show you in a second. I haven't done it yet. Alright, so let's add our constraints. And actually, I'll make it smaller so you see what constraints are going to do. So you're going to click on the stack view, go to the bottom right button, it looks like a square with two lines on both sides.
Typewriter.
It's a what?
TIE fighter.
It's a TIE fighter.
I got that from Nate.
Oh, okay.
I don't even know who I got that from.
Cal.
Brian Lang, I don't know.
All right. So once you click, we can see those lines, and we can put zeros on all sides. So 0, 0, 0, and 0. So make sure that all the lines are red, which means that the constraints are set. And now we're gonna press on Add Form Constraints at the bottom. So you can see that the view expanded and took up the entire screen. And of course, now if I open it on an iPad, it will still take up the entire screen. All right. So let's see what we're gonna do next. We're gonna go back to the slides. All right, so this is what we have now. So what we need for our game is two buttons, one on the top and one on the bottom. So we're gonna drag one button on the stack view, so inside the stack view, and this is gonna happen. And then we're gonna drag another button on the stack view, and then this is gonna happen. So this doesn't look right, right? We want it to take equal amount of space, and we'll fix that later. So let's drag and drop two buttons in the stack view. So in case you didn't get it yet, a stack view allows you to stack multiple views. And in this case, we're stacking two buttons. And it's just a quick way to manage multiple views and like stacking them. So let's go ahead and add a button. So click again on that plus button in the top right and drag and drop a button inside the stack view. So this time, make sure when you drop it, it's going to be highlighted in blue. The stack view is going to be highlighted in blue, which means you're dragging inside the stack view. All right. You can also see in the bar on the left that our button is indeed in the stack view. So what we're going to do now is add another button. Again, inside the stack view. All right. We knew this was going to happen. They're stacked, but they're not taking the same amount of space. And stack views allow you to fix that very easily. So, has everyone dragged and dropped the two buttons?
If you need help, just raise your hand.
Yeah.
One of the officers.
Alright. So, we're going to click on the stack view in the bar on the left. And then we're going to go to the Attributes Inspector. So, what is this called, Will?
Attributes inspector.
No, the icon.
Upside down arrow?
Upside down arrow.
It's like a slider.
Oh yeah, it is a slider. Alright, so we go there, make sure the stack view is selected. And we're going to change the distribution from fill to fill equally. And you can probably guess what's going to happen. So let's do it. Alright, now the buttons are taking equal amount of space inside the stack view. And we did that in very little work, and that's what's good about stack views.
What do you do if they're like vertical?
Okay, so that means you probably dragged and dropped a horizontal stack view instead of a vertical one.
Yeah, I told you that.
So I think there's a quick way to fix that.
Yeah, it just says at the top axis vertical.
Oh yeah, just change the axis to vertical instead of horizontal. Inside the attributes inspector.
Oh, I see. Right there.
Alright. So yeah, we can see it in the slides if we want, even though we just saw it. So we dragged and dropped, they didn't take the same amount of space. We put fill equally, and boom, this is what happened. So we're gonna need other stuff for this game. We have two buttons, but we also need to display the score, and we're gonna display it in the middle, so between those two buttons. So we're gonna be adding another stack view inside the stack view, and it's gonna look like this. Again, it's fill equally, so it's giving the same amount of space for the score display, the stack view. Inside this stack view, which is this time gonna be horizontal, we're gonna be adding three UI elements. Two two labels and a button. So the label on the left will be the score for player 1, label on the right will be score for player 2, and the button in the middle will just say start, to start the game. So let's do that. So we said we wanted to add a horizontal stack view and place it inside the stack view between the two buttons. So you can either drag and drop and make sure it's highlighted to make sure you're putting in between, or if you want to be safe, you could do this. All right. So now inside the stack view, we want to add two labels and one button. So label for player 1 score, label for player 2 score, and in the middle we want a button. Again, make sure you're putting all these three elements in the inner stack view, the horizontal one. This is about all the UI elements we're going to need for this game. We just need to make it look a little prettier. And yeah, so let's do that. First of all, what I'm going to do is click on the buttons in the outside stack view. I don't know how to call it, but yeah, the vertical stack view. So for the top one, I'm going to click on it and then go again to the attributes inspector on the right. Is everyone following? Should I go slower or faster? Or normal? Alright, great. Okay. So I clicked on the button, the one on the top. So we want to call, like, we want to change the text that says button. We want to say something like player 1. So we know that this is the button for player 1 to play. And what we can do is change the background color. So you can scroll all the way down and see background. So right now it's set to default, and we can change it. So here, you can put whatever you want. I think I'm gonna go with orange. Maybe not this orange. Yeah, yellow. Yellow sounds good. Alright.
In system means it works with dark mode pretty well.
Kind of good color. Alright, that's fine. We're going to do the same thing for the other button. So we're going to change the text that says button to player 2. So again, it's on the attributes inspector to the right, and you write player 2. And we're going to give it a different color. So you scroll down and go to background, and you can set it to whatever color you want. So yeah, I'm going to do that and change the text to white. So you don't have to do this, but I'm going to change the text to white. Yeah, okay, alright. We still have text to change, so there's two labels in the button. So the button in the middle should say start. The label on the left should say player 1 score. So again, to change the value of the text, you just click on the label, either here or here, and then you go to the right to the attributes inspector, and you change the text value. So we're going to do something else here. We're going to change the text value, and we're also going to change the alignment to center. So this works basically like any text editor, like Word or something, and we're just saying that we want it to be centered. All right. So same for start. We're gonna for label. We're gonna change it to player 2 score, and we're gonna have it centered. All right. So that's it. That's what our game's gonna look like, and we can actually run it to see if anything's wrong. So how you run your games or apps is by pressing on the play button in the top left. You can pick whatever emulator you want to run it on, so iPhone 11, 8, whatever. Yeah, I'll do the hyphen. So it might take a while, but it only takes a while the first time. Then it's pretty fast.
Yeah, it has to download debugger support, so if you're short on storage, just stick to one device. It could be like a gigabyte.
Who has finished setting up the UI and is running it right now? Okay. Does anyone need help? Alright. Alright, maybe I'll go through the slides in the meantime. Alright. So now that we set up our UI, our next step is going to be to connect some of our UI elements to our code. So we want that when the player 1 or player 2 presses on their button, we want something to happen, right? We don't want a static game. So here's what it's going to look like. We're going to connect our button to our code. That's basically what's going to happen. Yeah, so basically for the button, you create an IB action connection, and when you press on the button, some segment of code will run. And we can do the same thing for our labels. We can do an IB outlet connection, and that allows us to modify the value, like the text value of the labels. So like we're gonna be updating the score here, so we wanna connect our label to our code. All right, let's see if it ran. All right, cool. Perfect. So I can click on the buttons and nothing happens, but it looks right. Alright, so we're going to be writing our code in the view controller that's Swift. So this is the file associated with the view controller that we just designed in the storyboard. Of course, if you had a more complex app with more screens, you'll have to create multiple of these files and connect them to the right view controllers. Yes?
What's a view controller?
What's a view controller?
Yeah.
So it's a screen that contains at least one view.
No, it's something that controls a view. It's not, right? It's not necessarily what you see on the screen, because there's a UI screen, and there's the UI views that make up that, which is what you see on the storyboard. But you can think of it for now as a somewhat one-to-one relationship that while you're starting out, there's going to be one view controller Swift file for every board in the storyboard. Like that's one.
Each of these would have its
Yeah,
own
yeah.
view controller.
Yeah, for now.
And like, what he means by controlling, like we're gonna be defining functions like view did load. When the view, for example, loads on the screen, what are we gonna do? Or when someone clicks on a button, what are we doing? It controls all those things. So I want you to go to your main.storyboard and click on this plus button on the top right, not the one we've been using, but the one that says add editor on right. So I'll click on it. Alright. So you should have your storyboard on the left and your view controller code on the right. And if you don't, maybe raise your hand and someone will do it.
Just make sure it says view controller.
Yeah.
Maybe
It just
I'll
says
highlight
view
that.
controller that's Swift on the right. And you should see this on the left. Or the opposite, of course. It doesn't matter. All right, so we're gonna need to make some connections. So we're gonna need to connect the score because we're gonna have to update it. All right, I'm gonna have to explain how we connect things to code. So basically, you're gonna press on the control. Should I? Yeah, I'll wait a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine. Then you just choose here, like in that. You see that yellow, like that. Just click. Choose view controller. It's kind of bunched up because you might want to close out these. Mal, can you show them?
Override
If you close this out by doing that.
So there's a base function that is already defined for unit load. So we're overriding it and basically calling the parent function. So this is to add more functionality. So have you done like object-oriented programming? Yeah, so we're just adding functionality to something defined by Apple.
You can adjust. You really don't need that too much for now, but yeah. So now.
Yeah, so we're calling the original
The X
to make sure that original code runs. All right, so let's make our first connection. So I'm gonna press on control, the control
Wait,
key.
There's still.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna do lots of them. So, but yeah,
So what we're gonna do now is basically, so like there's different UI elements that are on the screen on the left side. And we want to modify them from code. So we're gonna have to make that connection between the element that's on that screen and the right side, which is the code. So basically what's gonna happen is we're gonna control drag click from like a button to the right side, and it's gonna make that connection, and you'll see it in the code. So don't do it yet. That's what we're gonna do.
my storage is almost full.
Wait, your iCloud storage?
Levels. Deleting IntelliJ.
I think everyone's ready.
Hmm?
I think everyone's ready.
All right, so if everyone's ready, I'm gonna start doing the connections. So the way it works is you press on the control key on your keyboard and you drag to your code. So you drag from whatever element you want to connect to your code. Make sure you're inside the class view controller. It doesn't have to be anywhere specific, but it's convention to put it on top for IB outlet connections. So I drag and drop. So it knows that I want an outlet connection. I'm gonna name it player 1 label.
What's an outlet?
Doesn't matter. You guys don't need to know.
Just know the difference between outlet and action. Outlet allows you to modify some UI element, and action allows that when something happens on the screen, some code runs. All right, so as you can see, create a variable for me. This circle on the left means that it's connected to one of my UI elements, and it's of type UI label, which is what I had in the screen. So I'm gonna connect the other one, same thing, control, drag, I'm gonna put it right under it. Make sure it's outlet, same thing again, player 2 label. I detected that it's of type UI label, and I press connect. All right. So these are all the outlet connections that we're gonna need. Next, we're gonna connect our buttons. So we're gonna make IB action connections. So I'll drag from the player 1 button to the code. So I'm gonna put it under view did load this time, but make sure you're still inside the class. I drag and drop. This time it's an action type of connection. So on buttons, you can actually have outlet connections. Because what if you want to change like the title of a button? You would go through an outlet connection. So I want an action. I'm gonna name it player 1 pressed. I don't know. I'll do player 1 button. That's easier. Player 1 button.
Did press.
Yeah, alright. Player 1 did press. Okay. So as you can see, it automatically defaulted to touch up inside. So that's one type of event, and like that means when you touch a button and you release. You can have all sorts of events like dragging and I don't know what else. It could be like just when you start touching, not when you touch and release. But yeah, let's connect it. We're gonna do the same thing for player 2, the button for player 2. Drag, drop. Make sure it's an action connection. The name is gonna be player 2. Did press. Touch up inside and connect. Last thing we need to connect is our start button. So same thing, drag, drop, have control pressed, and name it start was pressed. Again, action connection, touch up inside. Great.
If you change the name of it, your app's gonna crash. So don't like, if you make a typo, there's more steps, and just call us for help.
Yes, don't change the names after making the connections. I found out a good way to change the names. I think it's command. Yeah, command and then rename or something. Alright.
I think it's right click and then you can refactor.
Alright, right.
But yeah, it should fix it that way.
Refactor, yeah, and rename. Don't do it any other way. Alright, so we're gonna close our main.storyboard because now we don't need it anymore. We connected everything we needed. And we're gonna start writing some code. Alright, so for this game we're going to need to keep track of some variables. So let's set them up. One of our variable is going to be player 1 tap count and player 2 tap count. So basically we're going to be keeping track of each player's score in variables. The way you declare variables in Swift is you just do var and then you put the name of your variable. And then you assign it some value. And now here, you're probably wondering why we're not putting the type. This is called implicit type because we're giving it a 0 and the compiler just guesses that it's going to be an int. But you could also do this and say it's an int. There are some scenarios where you have to explicitly say the type, but in this case we don't need to. So I'll just leave it to this. I'm going to define the other variable to be player 2 tap count. And also set it to 0 because we want the player's score to start at 0. Another variable that we're going to need towards the end is going to be is game started, and that's basically going to help us to know if we're in the middle of a game or we're not. Yeah. So same thing, var is game started. So now, another way of declaring variables, or it would be constants. So to declare constants, it would be let. So if you declare a variable as let, you won't be able to change it. The compiler won't let you. So its value will remain the same. All right. Cool. So we're gonna start by implementing the start function. So when the player presses on the start button, what is gonna happen? So first thing is we want to disable that button, right? We don't want someone spamming the start button. So as soon as they press it, we're gonna disable it. So to do this, first of all, we're gonna change the any here in the inputs to a UI button. So right now, this function is accepting any type as a sender, but we only want UI buttons because we're gonna be calling functions that are specific to UI buttons, and it's basically is enabled. The variable is enabled. So is enabled, we're gonna set it to false. So we're grabbing the is enabled property of the button and we're setting it to false. And it's gonna gray out and you won't be able to press it anymore. Alright, we're gonna initialize our variables. Is game started has to be true now. Make sure our scores are 0 by setting them to 0. Player 2 tap count 0. Alright. Alright, let's now implement player 1 did press. So what happens when player 1 presses on his button? Basically, we're going to increment its score variable by 1. Don't do plus plus, it doesn't work. Only plus equal or equal plus 1. So same thing for player 2 did press. We're incrementing its variable, actually. Yeah, player 2 tap count. Alright, you might think this is enough, but we still need to display the score on the screen when it changes. And since we're doing the same thing for player 1 and player 2, we're going to separate this out in a function that we're going to call update UI. And so I'm going to define it right under this func update UI. So I could write the same code for both, but I'm just organizing things. So in our update UI function, what we want to do is, first of all, if we're inside a game, make sure we're inside the game, and we're going to update our labels to display the score. So we use our outlet connections, the two labels that we connected, to change their values. So player 1 label, that text, and then we're going to display our score. So we're going to write player 1 score. And then what you're going to learn here is string interpolation. So you can put variables inside of strings. So the way you do this is backslash, open parentheses, close parentheses. And then you put the name of the variable inside the parentheses. So like if I put player 1 score here, player 1 tap count, it will say player 1 score colon whatever the score is. And we want to do the exact same thing for player 2. Of course, for different variables. Alright, and we want to call this function each time someone presses on a button. Update UI. Update UI.
Any questions?
Will the function use Swift ever have a return type?
Yes.
This
So
one doesn't.
no, this one doesn't.
Because like it's void, you can just not write it.
Oh yeah, you don't need to write it. If it's void, you don't need to write it.
The way you write that is with an arrow sign.
Yeah, if there was a return type, I would go like this. Yeah. Yes.
Is there like a main method that we start running this from?
So main method, not
Yes.
really, but viewDidLoad is like the first function that gets called when your view is loaded. So you can count that as your main method. There are also methods that get run when the app itself loads in the app delegate. And
Yeah, there's a main method, but it's not here. If you wrote in Objective-C instead of Swift, you would see it's like main.c, just like any main.c, and that's where your the operating system just starts executing your app's code, and then that calls into the app delegate, and that's where you can see like application did start, basically, did finish launching with options. And then every time your view controller appears, or right before it appears, basically it loads. And then that's called viewDidLoad. And then that's the function up there that I don't think we're using for this app. but it's there automatically when you create a view controller. But we don't need that because we're just waiting for people to press on things.
So we're actually almost done. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Do we change the sender type from any to UI button for the player 1 press and player 2 press?
No, no. So for that, it doesn't. You could if you want to, but it doesn't matter because we're not doing anything specific to buttons. In this case, we did because we're calling is enabled, and that is specific to UI buttons.
So like the line sender dot is enabled is false means that we disable the button, you can press on it again.
Exactly.
So does that mean like the game it's a one-time game because you can never press it again? Or like
That's what it is right now. And the last thing we have to do is make sure it ends at some point. So we're gonna set up a timer, and that's like the last thing we have to do for this game. So after we set up, so when they press on start, we disable the start button. We set up our variables to 0, and our game is started to true. And we started timer. So I'll write this. So we're gonna do let underscore. I'll explain the syntax in a minute. Timer that schedule. So here, please use autocomplete. We want to schedule a timer with interval. Yeah. So the first one. So for the time interval, I'm gonna do 10. I think 10 seconds is good enough for a game. We don't want it to repeat. And for the third parameter, I want you to click on it, make sure it's highlighted in blue, and press enter. So it's gonna set up code like this for you. Alright, so I will write timer here, and I will explain what's happening here. So we're calling timer that scheduled timer. So this is a static function that allows us to set up a timer. It has a return type that we don't need in this case, and that's the reason we're putting an underscore. We don't actually need to store it somewhere because we're not going to use it.
So you could just delete the let part, right? Does it come plain? I haven't actually used it.
It might be yellow.
Hopefully it's just discardable. Should be fine.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. Alright. I don't know, I like to see it. Alright, so inside the code, so this is called a closure. So basically the code that we're gonna write here is gonna run once the timer is over. So after 10 seconds, so this is gonna be asynchronous, of course. This will keep running, but this portion won't run until the 10 seconds are over. So I will, so basically when the 10 seconds are over, what do we want? We want our start button to be enabled again, so we can start another game. So I will do sender that is enabled, is enabled to be true, and set our is game started to true, to false, sorry, since the game is over. So we're inside a closer here, and that's the reason I'm using self-dat. Do you want to explain that, Will?
If you're more interested, come to iOS Lab.
Alright.
And there could, like for example, memory leaks of using self and things like that.
So I think we got everything here, and we can actually run it. Anyone has a question?
Scroll back down.
Oh, yeah. Alright, I'll run it.
Like your Excel keeps jumping up and down.
Spreadsheets are calling.
Alright, looks the same. So let's see what happens. So if I press now, nothing's gonna happen because we're not inside a game. And that's what our is game started was for. I press on start. Boom, it's working. And let's wait maybe 10 seconds. Alright, player one's on here. Yeah, and the game is over. Alright. Anyone has this working? Yeah? Do you have any bugs? Any red flags?
Yeah, you changed. How do you refresh the simulator?
So you go to the top left and press on play. Yeah, you can stop the old one using this.
Anyone need help?